some depth. We can go into some depth on the questions that you have, and we can use the chat as well if it's useful. If you would like to use the chat, I'll do my best to moderate that as well. And just giving a couple of people a minute or two longer to join. But to introduce myself, my name is Mark Turpin. I work as a coach, consultant, a part-time lecturer at the Wits Business School on organizational learning, and also work as a mediator, which is one of the spaces that takes me into sometimes difficult conversations that we have to have. And the theme of our conversation today is very much around having difficult conversations, how to have difficult conversations successfully. And in that context, particularly thinking around assertive communication, which I distinguish from what could be seen as more aggressive communication, or sometimes at the other extreme, submissive conversation, or lack of conversation. If we're being submissive, we sometimes just don't say anything when we need to. So the focus will be really thinking about assertiveness, particularly, and how to have good conversations using assertive skills and behaviors. And this is something that's so important in the world of work. And the theme for today's meeting is one that I've discussed with Nolene as a result of questions that have come up in previous mentoring circles. It seemed that it would be useful to have this conversation today. So we're going to start by thinking a little bit around assertive communication. What would be really nice would be if it's possible for many of you to switch on your cameras just for a minute, and then we can capture a screenshot of you all here, which is really nice for Nolene and the folks from the Geological Society to be able to see. So if you could, if as much as possible, you could switch on your cameras for just a minute and do that now. If it's possible, then we can take a quick screen grab. Oh, it's really nice to see people face to face as well as your names. Yeah, we've had so much time over the last 2 or 3 years talking with lists of names on the screen. It's really nice to see that there are actually some real people out there. Thank you. I'm just going to take a quick screenshot of it all. I hope I've done that. Yeah, I've done. Thank you. So if you want to disappear again, if it's easier, then you can do that. So first of all, when I start talking about assertiveness, I want to distinguish it and make it very different from more aggressive kind of ways of engaging with people or confronting people. Sometimes the two are confused. People confuse assertive communication with aggressive communication, but they're very different things. They're very different things. And if someone is communicating aggressively with you or in an aggressive way, you can usually see it and recognize it quite quickly. So I just want to kind of throw it open, and participation, by the way, is really good in these circles. The more questions you all ask, the more we will learn together. And so my first question is, if someone is being aggressive with you, or if you are being aggressive with somebody else, how do you recognize it? How do you know that someone is being aggressive with you? What are the things that you would see or hear?
I think for me, it would normally be a raised voice and just body language. Yeah, just creating a bigger person.
Yeah, and the tone, Mary Joy. Yeah, absolutely. So what will happen if someone is being aggressive with you? Firstly, they might raise their voice, almost start shouting, or if they're very angry, because angry and aggression often go together, they would even perhaps sometimes shout. So the volume and the tone of voice is raised. So that's something that you can actually hear. And then also you might see behaviors that would go with that. Somebody pointing their finger at you or thumping their fist on the table to try and show you, excuse me, to try and show you how angry they are with you. So it's something that you could see or hear in terms of body language, and the voice volume and tone is raised, very much so. So it's to give you the knowledge and information that they are angry and being aggressive with you. So if you are being assertive, these are things to avoid, because as soon as you start doing those things, people will start thinking you're being more aggressive. And generally, that's not a good way to get the results that you want. Also, as well, if somebody is being aggressive, the language can shift as well. So you might find, for instance, when someone is pointing, they're pointing at you and they're talking about what you have done and how you have messed up. And so the focus is very much trying to put the blame and the responsibility for everything that has happened onto you. And the word you is used a lot when people are pointing their fingers and thumping their fists on the table and so on. So I think between the words that people are using, the tone of voice and the volume and the body language becomes aggressive. It's quite easy to recognize when people are being aggressive. Any questions about that or any thoughts about what I'm saying? Or is there anything else that I've missed? Yes, Mark. Hi and welcome.
Thank you very much, Mark. I would also tend to think that aggression is a one-way conversation, whereas assertiveness doesn't need to be. Assertiveness can also require or invite some sort of feedback in the conversation.
Yes, aggressive communication is often a case where someone is not really interested in hearing what you have to say or getting your opinion on something. It can often be, as you say, a one-way conversation. You just have to be heard by the other person, and that's the only thing that matters. Whereas an assertive communication is often more two-way conversation. So yeah, aggression is often one way. And the person who's being aggressive or angry with you, sometimes it just isn't really interested in anything you have to say. Sometimes we try and respond by saying, oh, I'm sorry, or I didn't mean to, or yeah, things like that, which is being submissive. It's at the other end of the spectrum. And that works because some kind of apology can sometimes help a little bit. But don't keep repeating apologies, because then you're in the submissive zone, which is also not normally healthy. So yes, aggression is often a one-way, it was meant to be and intended to be a one-way communication with the other person, with you, because you've messed up. Yeah. So that's aggressive behavior. And on the other extreme, we have people who are being submissive. The aggressive behavior, by the way, is not healthy, as you can imagine, as you would understand. The other extreme is submissive behavior, and let me ask maybe how you would recognize when someone is being submissive. How would you see that, or what would you see or hear?
Nothing. You'd hear nothing.
You might hear nothing. The person's just looking at the floor while they're being shouted at. Yeah, you might hear nothing. You might hear a mumbled apology, maybe. What would you see? What would you see?
Um,
Mark? Yeah.
almost,
Is the
well,
message?
I'm trying to think of a better term, but a shrinking violet, somebody who sort of physically retracts from that encounter.
So I'm losing you a bit. What you would see is that people are looking down, maybe
Yeah.
looking away,
Avoid eye contact, yeah.
not looking directly at you. And yeah, often the head might be bowed a little bit. And sometimes arms get crossed because people adopt a kind of defensive posture. So you kind of cross your arms a bit like this sometimes. And you certainly don't, in terms of what you say, you really don't argue generally or fight back too much, but you kind of accept. I'm sorry, everyone. I seemed to get bounced out of the Zoom call. Thank you for waiting for me. Can you all hear me? Can I get a thumbs up or two? You can hear me?
Yeah, all good, all good.
I'm so sorry. And so I was talking about submissive behavior and how the tone of voice will go down. You're not going to confront or argue back with the person who is being angry with you. It's a response to the aggressive, angry behavior and the submissive behavior. And the kind of words that you will use will be, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I know I messed up. You're using I words a lot, and you're sort of absorbing blame and absorbing the anger of the other person to try and stop the aggressive or angry behavior towards you. But what is not required, as Mark is implying earlier, what is not required here is a two-way conversation, really. Nobody's interested in excuses or explanations that you might have. And all you can do really is just keep saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, and so on, to try and deflect or stop the aggressive or angry behavior. Problem solving is not happening here. You're just getting aggression and submission as opposite sides of the communication in this case. And basically, it's not really working because you're not trying to solve a problem. You're not trying to learn together. It's really just allowing someone to express and vent their anger with you, and you just sucking it up in some ways. And these kind of conversations are generally unhealthy. And if this is a pattern of behavior which continues over time, one of the things that can happen is that the person who is being submissive starts to actually store up anger, starts to store up anger. They're not expressing it, but inside you are storing up anger against the other person. And you will start thinking about ways in which you can get back somehow at the person who's being angry with you. And very often that can come out in other ways and other times. And this kind of passive-aggressive approach that you start adopting. And when you can get your revenge, you might well take your revenge on the other person. So it's an unhealthy way of working to be either aggressive or submissive, because it's not building the relationship. In fact, it's destroying the relationship. And you might even be storing up anger, which is going to come out at some other point in some other way against the person who's being angry with you now. So this is, I'm talking about kind of extreme forms of interaction in some ways when I'm talking about aggressive and submissive behavior. These tend to be extreme ways of communicating, but I put it like this to make the point that difficult conversations are often have some elements of both aggressive and submissive behavior. May not be quite as extreme as somebody who's furiously angry with you, but nonetheless, it's a one-way street and the conversation is not really productive or useful. So any questions about what I've been talking about so far? And please chip in, by the way, at any point if you want to argue with me or if you want to be angry with me about something, it's also fine. Okay, well, maybe you're keen for me to go on to what is the assertive conversation, because assertive conversation is very different from the things that I've been talking about so far. And speaking assertively and communicating assertively with somebody is really putting yourself in between these two extremes, and is very different from both of them. And the first thing I would say about being assertive is that you keep your tone of voice at a level, at a middle level. You don't raise your volume, but also you don't go so quiet that you can hardly be heard. So you keep your voice, as I'm doing now, at a kind of middle level. Even if you might actually be inside, you might feel quite angry with someone or cross with them. So the feelings can be different from the communication. So even if you are angry, you can say to somebody in a nice way, I feel angry and upset with you at the moment. You see the way I'm keeping my tone of voice and my volume level, even if I'm communicating something that is difficult or something that has made me upset or angry. I'm just going to communicate about it in a normal way, in a normal tone of voice, keeping my volume at a normal level. And this is going to set the tone for a better and more productive, sometimes difficult conversation. So the first thing to do is to keep your voice at a level. Don't raise the volume, don't change the tone, just speak to the other person in a normal tone and volume. But also don't go so quiet that you can hardly be heard. So the first thing is to do with the volume and tone of voice. Will help you to be assertive in your communication. And the second thing also is to avoid some of those body language behaviors that we've talked about. So you don't point at somebody, you don't thump your fist, you don't look away and look shyly down at your feet or anything like that. You just behave in a normal way in terms of your body language as you speak to the people. Yeah, so this is moving towards assertive communication. And the other thing is that in terms of the words you use, it's useful not to use you or I, but to talk about we. How can we solve this problem together? How could we do this in a way that works for both of us? Is a good way to have assertive communication. So it's not about blaming, it's not about taking full responsibility yourself for everything, but how can we together work on this particular thing that we want to work on. Yes, Nolene.
Mark, I sometimes find that when somebody says we, it comes across as very patronizing. Almost as if like I'm using the word we, but I'm actually meaning you. How do you avoid that?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, because you certainly don't want to come across as patronizing. So assertive communication is also a very genuine form of communication. You have to really mean we when you say, how could we work together to solve a problem? And not still expect only the other person to work on it. So this is about taking responsibility in the conversation. When you are communicating assertively, you are also taking responsibility for solving the problem and inviting the other person to do that with you. So I think that you, from your perspective or our perspective, as we communicate assertively, we have to be genuine about it. That's really important. Make it a genuine form of communication. And we can practice some of these things maybe a little bit later as we go through our circle today. Yeah. Does that help, Nolene, a little bit? They'll be very genuine.
It did. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, other questions? Betsy, did you have your hand up? Or Mark, you've got your hand up again. Yeah, welcome.
I have, sorry, Mark. It just struck me now that conversations are not just verbal, but they can be over email as well.
Very much.
Emails, I've always said, never write an email in anger.
Yeah.
It shows really clearly. Rather sit on it and maybe overnight and then reply the next day or something like that. So this what you're saying, I think, is very applicable to email correspondence as well.
You know, when I mediate conflict in the workplace, often I find conflict that is related to an email chain that has been going around. And this is what has caused the conflict. And sometimes what happens is that one person will send an email copying lots of people in. Someone feels aggrieved or upset by the email, And then they reply, again, copying everybody in. They reply defensively or trying to explain what they did. And it starts a whole chain of emails in which lots of people get involved and people are getting angry and increasingly upset. And sometimes I get presented with a whole chain of maybe 100, 150 emails that have been going around. And this is what has caused the conflict. And I'm invited then often to try and unpack what has gone wrong. It usually goes back to the first email. That's where the conflict started, in the first email. Or the second, but right at the beginning is where it all starts to go wrong. And as you say, Mark, it's sometimes because people reply quickly or reply defensively, or they send the first email without thinking about the feelings of people at the other end and how they may feel to be called out in front of over email a lot of other people. So thinking carefully about how we use email is an important part of this. Assertive communication. Something else that is important in assertive communication is that if I've got a problem with Carmel, I'm going to talk to her directly. I'm not going to talk to everybody in this group about it. So to communicate directly with the person that you need to communicate with, and not with other people or the wrong people. So if I've got an issue with Carmel, there's no point in me going to talk to Manchar about it or Eugene, because I'm talking to the wrong person. It might be easy for me to talk to somebody else, but it's much more useful to talk directly to the person that I need to communicate with, and to think carefully about how we do it. What I say in terms of managing email, which is so important in the world of work, is to always think carefully about what is the message you're trying to communicate before you decide how to communicate it. So what I mean by that is that if you do have to have a very difficult conversation with somebody, it's better not to do it over email. It's better to go and knock on their door or to sit down and have the conversation face to face. Much better. Not over email. You can hide in email, but it's not a good way of communicating in a difficult situation. And you don't retrench people over email. You don't fire your boyfriend or girlfriend over WhatsApp, and so on and so on and so on. It's not a good way to communicate. Even though these forms of communication are easy, they're often not effective for the kind of message you want to send. So before you send messages over social media or email, always think about what kind of message is this? Is this fairly routine and straightforward? Then email is fine. But if it's a difficult conversation, then it's good to try to speak to people face to face or some other way. Even a Zoom call sometimes, if the person is not in your city or in your building, even a Zoom call is sometimes better than an email, if it's a difficult conversation that you want to have. So I call it thinking about the channel as well as the message. Think firstly about the channel of the communication. What is the best channel for this kind of message that I want to communicate? Yeah. Any other questions so far? Is this useful? Is it connecting with your experiences? Just get some feedback. Yeah. Some of you, this is useful. That's great. And again, raise hand or put something in the chat if you want to do so. Muketwa, yeah, it's useful. Thank you. So what might be useful is to think about one or two very specific, difficult conversations that you might want to have. And then we can talk about how you might go about doing that. I don't know if any of you have got any examples in mind. Any examples that any of you would like to bring to the table? What could be a difficult conversation that you have?
Hi everyone.
Hi,
Mark,
Carmel.
just on my side, so I'm in finance, and I think it always comes across especially when we're presenting reports that are not looking so good, it always comes across as a negative or sort of a fight against the other divisions in the company. So that's just an example of a difficult conversation that I'm always having to say. Like we need to pull up our socks in a nice way.
Because we're not doing well, or your division
Yes.
is not doing well.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good example. We'll come to that. Mark.
Well, I've got two. One is that it always annoys me when somebody's got a complaint and they phone the help desk or the call center.
Yes.
Start screaming and shouting at the poor person on the other end of the phone who has nothing to do with it whatsoever, except to sort of document your complaint. So shouting and screaming does not help whatsoever.
Yeah, it happened to me this morning.
Sorry?
It happened to me this morning when I went to the bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one was for me is when you do annual reviews with your staff.
Yes.
It's a two-way street. It's not a telling conversation. You've got to be assertive to get your message across that you've observed and things, but it's also got to be in a way relationship building or building that person's confidence up for going forward. I think if you make it an angry thing, then you destroy that person's confidence. Yeah.
Poetsy, you need to mute yourself, I think.
Yeah.
Or
Oh, I
someone.
did.
Yeah. So look, I've got 2 or 3 different categories of difficult conversation that you've given me straight away. I mean, I've got giving bad news, Carmel, and you have to give bad news to people. When you're making a complaint to a call center or to the bank, as I was this morning, when you're doing an annual review, when you're giving feedback. So all these are examples of difficult conversations. So I think they're very good examples, thank you, because they all can be difficult conversations to have. The first thing that I think is always very useful if you are starting the conversation is to what I would call frame it. So it could be, for instance, Carmel, you've got some bad news to give to a particular division. So I think I would start by saying, look, thanks for meeting with me about this. And I'm sorry sometimes that we in finance are bringing bad news or news that is difficult to hear. And I do have some difficult news or bad news today about your division's financial performance. So I would always start like that, by introducing what the conversation is going to be about. And then you can pause for a bit and then see how they respond. They might say, well, at the moment, we just don't want to hear any bad news, Mark. So can we maybe do this next week instead?
Yeah.
That might be one way of doing it. But if you introduce and frame the conversation and tell people what this conversation is going to be about, it can help to put people at their ease a little bit, because then they know. They may not know what the bad news is yet, but at least they know that this is something that might be difficult for them to hear. So I would always start like that. And again, if you are making a complaint, look, you could say, for example, yet again, I've come to this bank and I have a complaint to make. And I'm sorry that I'm making it to you because it may not be your fault or your responsibility, but I feel very aggrieved and upset by the way I'm being treated by the bank. And I would like to talk with you about that. So that might be a way of starting to introduce the complaint conversation. And similarly, the performance review, I would introduce and frame at the beginning by saying, we're here to review your performance for the past 6 months or whatever it is. And There may be some things that you might find harder to hear, and I may also give you some good feedback as well. But I want us to approach this conversation in a positive way that is for all our benefit. So with all these situations, with the complaint, with giving bad news, and with the performance review, I would have an initial sentence or two in which I introduce and frame what the conversation is going to be about. And I would do it in the way that I've been doing it here, with keeping my voice tone level. You will have noticed I don't raise my voice. Just because I'm angry with the bank, I don't have to shout at anybody. Even though I was very angry with them this morning, but I didn't raise my voice. And I'm trying to keep my blood pressure at a normal kind of level with it. So introducing and framing the conversation, I think, is a really good start. Yeah. And you start to put people a little bit at their ease, even though they know that the conversation might be difficult. They might also give you some feedback, as I said, look, could we do this at another time? Or could we go and sit down in my office when we have the conversation and not do it here in the hallway or whatever it is? And those kind of things can also make for a better and more productive conversation. How does that feel?
Yeah, good, right.
Sounds okay, Mark?
Hang on a second. It does, yeah. Perfect.
These things are always important to practice. We can't all instantly do everything like this straight away, but these are important things to practice. And they are important for a number of reasons. One is because we want to keep our stress levels down, and raising our voice doesn't help our stress levels. And it's important at work to not get overstressed, because they're fundamentally unhealthy. So the things that we do here to be assertive, we do partly for our own health and for our own well-being. And also then to have conversations that work for the other person as well as for yourself. So we're trying to move forward through this difficult situation, if it's possible to do so, as we have the difficult conversation, but to do it in a way that is, maybe this is the other thing about assertive communication. It's based on the idea that I am okay, and you also are also okay as a person, even though the issue that we talk about might be difficult, and we might have different views about it. But fundamentally, as people, we are okay. And we are healed, and we're not looking to damage or hurt the other person. And we are also seeking not to be hurt or damaged ourselves as we talk about this difficult issue. I think that's a really useful mindset to have. Cause no damage as you have the conversation. And then make it a two-way street. So again, thinking about how we communicate is also thinking about where we communicate. So again, if it's a performance review, let's schedule it well in advance. Let's have it in a private office, and all these kind of things help to make the conversation easier. Yeah. So stage one, I think, is to using the techniques that I've talked about, proper tone of voice and so on, but to frame the conversation. Carmel, does that help a little bit as a start?
Yes, definitely. I was taking notes the whole time, so that
Okay.
definitely helps.
Cool. So then I think having framed the conversation in that kind of way, and maybe got some agreement or a way forward together with the other person, then I would sit down with them and then say, okay, well, listen, let's go into some of the, if it is the bad news, Carmel, that we're talking about in your case, let's talk about some of the things that are not really working from the financial perspective in terms of your division. So to actually, now you go into really the meat of the conversation, the middle part, as I would call it. Let's talk about these difficult things. And again, we talk about it in a way that we're going to talk not about how you have messed up, but we're going to talk about these things that don't really work for the finance department. Yeah. So again, it's not about blaming anybody. but we're sharing a perspective about something that has been going on that doesn't really seem to work easily. And we then talk through it. These are the things that are difficult for us, and invite then some kind of response or reaction. When you've said what you need to say, how does it feel? You might say, how does it feel for you when I share this bad news with you? Or how does it feel when I can see this might come across as us being a bit too critical of you? I don't know how you feel about it. So invite some kind of response, but in that kind of way that is invitational for the communication. And they may say things like, well, we're in such a hurry, you don't understand the pressures we're under, or whatever. It may be that there are some good reasons why they're not putting things into the format that you want, or whatever it is, which is feedback, and useful feedback for you, because you might be able to help them with doing things in a slightly different way. You might have some extra capacity you could offer, or whatever it is. But you're problem solving straight away as soon as you start inviting some response from the other division or whatever it is. And there may be some ways you can help them. Whereas if you just say you're doing all this wrong and you're not open to any kind of feedback or response, you're not going to solve any problem. You'll still keep getting the same unhelpful or paperwork that is not useful or whatever it is. So to invite some kind of response often leads to problem solving. Yeah. This is the meat of the conversation in the bad news frame that we talked about earlier. If we're thinking about the complaint, again, you would go into the details of the complaint. I told you that I wanted to complain about some things. It's been an ongoing problem with the bank that I've had for a long time. And I'm not sure if you can help with anything, or if this is just the way it's going to be. But how do you see it from your perspective? So again, inviting a perspective from the other party is always useful. They may say, well, our systems just don't allow us to do it in the way that you want, Mark. And with the bank, that's often the case. And then you just have to live with it, because you can scream and shout as much as you like, but nothing's going to change. Or they may say, your feedback is very helpful to us, and we must think about how we adjust our systems accordingly. That would be on the complaint side. And again, in none of this are you raising your voice or thumping your fist on the table. You may feel angry and upset inside sometimes, because it may have been something that's been going on for a long time. But that thumping your fist or pointing your fingers or saying you always mess up is not going to help you get to a useful resolution for you or for the other side. Similarly, in the feedback conversation or the performance review conversations, you would share what you think is the appropriate feedback and invite the other person to say how they see it, or how do they feel about it, or is there anything they're struggling with that means they can't perform at the kind of level or in the way that you would like. And again, there may be something useful that you can put on the table, which can help them to perform at a better level or at a higher level. So you're not leaving people alone. I think that's also really important in assertive communication. It is in a very real sense about you and the other person, and neither of you being alone and both of you being present to try and solve the issue or the problem together, or the complaint, trying to solve it together. And seeing it as a shared responsibility always is really useful. So that's dealing with the meat of it, is inviting, saying how it is for you and inviting the other person to say how it is for them as well. That's the middle part of your communication. And then I think if you are making some progress, then at a certain point you might try and summarize the progress that you are making and where you've got to, and maybe what some next steps could be, as a way of starting to wrap up the difficult conversation. So it seems as if we are agreeing 1, 2, and 3. which is really good. And I'm going to do these things and you're going to do those things. And then we can start moving towards a resolution at this point, because we seem to be resolving the issue or solving the problem. And you would always, of course, thank the other person for stepping into it with you, assuming that they are stepping into it with you, and also communicating in a mature, adult and assertive way with you about it. So in summary, what I'm saying, I suppose, is first of all, framing the conversation and introducing what it has to be about, as far as you're concerned. Going into the meat, the difficult part in the middle, and having that conversation and inviting a response, because they also have a perspective on it. And once you get a response, you go into seeing where's the common ground, or what can we do together, or what can you do and what could they do to solve the problem. And then in the end, the final part is going to be around summarizing what you are deciding and making a sort of final agreement almost on it, and thanking the other person for being in the conversation with you. Yeah, this is in an ideal world, of course. It doesn't always work like this in an ideal world, but this is what you should aim at. And even if you approach the conversation in these ways, even with difficult customers or people who sometimes can be aggressive or whatever, this can generally lead you to a slightly better outcome than you would get if you don't. If you just go into either submissive behavior or walk away or something like that, it's better to have the conversation. You will generally get to a slightly better outcome than if you don't. Questions? Other examples could be when you have to negotiate something. You could be negotiating a salary increase or negotiating terms and conditions for a new job that you are being offered. Difficult conversations to have, but better to have the conversation than to remain silent. So again, if you, for example, want to negotiate a wage increase or salary increase with your boss, that can be something that people very often are afraid of doing or don't know quite how to go about it. And again, I think I would start in pretty much the same way by, first of all, introducing and framing the conversation that you would like to have with the other person. To say, please, sir, please, ma'am, I would like to come and discuss my salary with you. And could we make a time, often a good idea, could we make a time when I can come and have a conversation with you about my salary? And to do it in that very straightforward way, making it very clear what you want the conversation to be about. And if you can schedule a time to do that. Not being aggressive, but also not shying away from having the conversation. And then that's the initial framing part. So if you are able then to schedule that meeting, then when you go into the meeting, you say, well, as I said to you, I'm very keen to discuss with you my salary level. You might say, for example, I've been at the company for 12 months. My performance, I believe, has been at a satisfactory level. And I think it's time that we can together review my salary for the coming year. And you're not demanding by approaching it in that way, but you're being clear. So you're not being submissive either, you're not being aggressive, you are just naming the issue and that you would like to, together with the other person. So if we could review my salary and then invite the other person to say, and I'm not sure quite how you see the value that I'm adding in the business at the moment, but perhaps we can talk about it. So again, invite the other person to respond. And that's how you go about it. That's how you start. You're not complaining. You're not shouting. You're not angry, at least not on the surface. You might be a bit upset or concerned inside because you feel you haven't been valued sufficiently. But you're still going to communicate and behave assertively as you raise the issue and as you seek to discuss the issue with the other person. Yeah. Thoughts, reflections, feedback. Or any other examples that anyone would like to bring.
Well, I thought that was a very useful example. I struggle with that personally, so but yeah, I do think that was a good example.
The
That
salary
maybe-
one.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Karma. And you know, when you are in the negotiation game or when you are negotiating things, very often it's not just one thing that you are talking about. It's often not just the salary. It's also about the value that you are adding to the business. And it's also about feedback that you may have had or may not have had about your performance. All these things can come into the conversation. So you're very seldom are you simply talking about one number. You might also be talking about the value that you can add. And I think it's useful to put that on the table. I believe I'm adding good value to the business and that my salary needs to somehow reflect that going forward. For example, would be a good way of talking about it. Because you're never just talking about one thing. There are always a lot of issues on the table, spoken about or not spoken about. And sometimes to put them on the table can be useful. Length of service, I've been here for 2 years now. I think it's a good time for us to review my salary. Yeah, so you're bringing up the length of service as one of the issues that needs to be thought about as a decision is made. Don't be shy, people. All the questions are good. Difficult conversations. The best learning comes from real examples of things that we confront, sometimes on a daily basis. Difficult conversations with a boss, with colleagues, with people that we are managing sometimes. How to fire somebody in a nice way. Which is also possible to do, by the way. You can smile and fire somebody at the same time. You don't have to be angry when you are giving people seriously bad news sometimes. But to do it in a way which still respects their humanity and treats them as a normal, good person who's maybe just in the wrong job. Yeah.
I think that would be a good example to show us.
Talking about firing somebody.
Out
Well,
of
look,
interest.
I mean, some of us have had to do this from time to time in our lives, and they say that it's one of the things that turns you for the first time really into a manager, the first time you've actually fired somebody. But I think what I usually firing somebody is going to come at the end of a lot of conversations or performance reviews or whatever it happens to be. So I think if you're firing someone for poor performance, which sometimes does happen, certainly the way I would go about it is, first of all, I would review with them. So, well, firstly, I'd set the scene. I say, I think we need to have a good conversation. Please, can you come to my office? So we're going to do it in private because this is not going to be an easy conversation. I would say that to them. And then say, look, I would I want to review with you what has happened while you've been at the business, and the performance that we've discussed over the last year and a half or 2 years or whatever it is. As you know from our previous conversations, it has not been satisfactory and at the levels that we expect in this business. And I'm not sure perhaps if we've met your expectations also in this company, but I think it's coming to the time where we have to bring it to an end. And I would be fairly blunt with them in that sense, that being dismissed might not be very nice or may not be a very good thing to hear. But you will understand from our previous conversations that your performance has not been at the levels we expect. So we need to make now some new plans. And from our side, we feel that your continued employment here isn't really working. So we need to bring it to an end. Carmel, I think that's how I'd go about it. It's not, these are difficult conversations, but I think, and again, there's no point in me shouting or raising my voice. I do want to be very clear though about what is happening. So in that sense, I am being assertive and clear about what is going to be the outcome here in this case, because in this case, you are using a lot of power that you have to be able to dismiss somebody, and they may not feel very easy. It may not feel very easy for them to have what for them would be a difficult conversation to be assertive back. But there's no reason for you to be angry or aggressive in doing it, because you just raise your own stress levels in that sense. So don't just do it, all these conversations we have with normal tone of voice and trying to, in some ways, take a lot of the emotion out of it. Not always easy, because people do get emotional and sometimes upset. Yeah, and it's also still very good, even in a situation like that, to maybe invite the other person to say what they think or how they felt, or if they feel that they've been treated unfairly or whatever, good feedback to get in the business. If someone feels that they've been treated very unfairly, maybe not by you, but maybe by other people. But sometimes assertive communication, in this case, for example, of firing someone, you've come to this point where the decision is not going to change, where they are going to be dismissed. And then it's not so much about problem solving, it's about really just communicating a difficult message, but still doing it in that kind of assertive way. Carmel, does that help?
Yes, no, it does. It's
You
just
like it?
amazing.
Have you got somebody you're about to fire?
No, I was just very interested because that is one of the most difficult conversations I can imagine a person having. And yeah, sure, it's an amazing skill to have, to be in a conversation.
So I think one of the things I would say is that assertive communication is something to practice. It doesn't easily come overnight, especially if you are, in some cases, in patterns of conversation or dialogue with people that have been more aggressive, or where you might have been submissive or something like that. To suddenly start communicating assertively can be difficult. So I think I would not encourage you to rush into the most difficult relationships you have and immediately start trying to be assertive because you went on Mark's mentoring circle, but to practice this form of engaging and communicating with people just in your normal course of social engagements with people at work, and sometimes in your social lives as well. But to start practicing these forms of behavior and conversation on the basis that you are okay and the other person is also mostly okay. and you're going to approach it on that basis and start practicing it. And if you start practicing assertive communication, and you will see that it does work for you, then increasingly you start to internalize this as a way of working, and it becomes how you normally engage with people. And when you are good at it, it becomes easier to have the more difficult conversations that sometimes we do have to have with other people. So don't rush into immediately the worst, most difficult relationship with somebody who may be very aggressive towards you. Because if you just immediately start being assertive, you'll probably turn up their volume, you'll turn up their aggression in the first instance, because they want you to go back to behaving how you used to behave before, in a more submissive kind of way. And they think that if they turn up their volume, they will drive you back down again. Very often, if you're trying to change a difficult pattern of interaction with people, you can provoke a very negative reaction in the early stages because they're confused about why you're suddenly behaving in a less submissive kind of way. And you can make them even more aggressive for a while until they start realizing that you really have changed and you're doing things differently now. One of the other things I need to mention is if you are dealing with somebody who is very aggressive towards you, and maybe towards other people as well, because it's often in their nature to be like this. If someone is being rude, shouting, being abusive, and we get these people sometimes in the workplace, then one of the things I encourage people to do sometimes when I'm coaching people in this kind of situation is to say, look, if someone really is being abusive or aggressive or rude to you in conversation, I would very politely and in this normal kind of tone of voice that I'm using, just ask them to stop. You could say, for instance, Nolene, please don't talk to me like this. I don't like it when you are abusive and rude to me. And I would much rather problem solve with you and see what the issue really is. But just calling me names all the time doesn't really work for me. So invite them to stop. And that can take some courage sometimes. Although very often you will find, if you have to do this sometimes, you'll find that it works. It generally works because people feel called out. They know that you've recognized what they do. And very often they'll just go and be rude or aggressive to somebody else and not so much with you anymore because they know that you see it and that you don't like it. Sometimes it's worth calling people out. Say, please don't do that. Or you don't have to be rude to me. I will still talk to you, but you don't have to be rude or abusive. And it doesn't work for me. And sometimes saying that can be very effective. To call out somebody's aggressive or rude or abusive behavior. Please don't do it. They're not going to change as a person. So as I say, they'll probably go and just do it to somebody else instead who's less assertive than you are. But being assertive in that way can be very powerful. Yeah. We all have to deal with these people sometimes in life. Is this helpful, people? Is it making progress?
Very helpful. Thanks, Mark.
Eugene, you're happy with this? You like this approach?
Yes, Mark, that's excellent.
Yeah. Any questions you have about it?
Not really.
Okay.
Quite enjoying.
Can you do it?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think would be the struggle, if there is a struggle with it?
The
Anyone?
fact that I just want to slap people.
Sometimes you want to. So yeah, look, as I said, hinted at a little bit earlier, we have to distinguish between how we feel inside and how we behave and how we communicate. Because this morning when I went into the bank, I was really upset and angry with them inside. But there's no point in me just communicating anger and aggression, which is what how upset I am, even though I'm feeling that inside. But I'm still able to communicate with the people that I communicated with in a polite and friendly way, because, yeah, as Mark said, I think at the beginning, it's not their fault that the bank systems don't work properly. So being angry with the person in front of you in that aggressive kind of way doesn't help or work. And they are still people, and they've still gone to work, and they still want to have a good day, and they're trying their best. So we have to sometimes distinguish how we feel inside and how we behave on the outside. So in the conversation with the consultant that I was speaking to, I was saying, look, I actually feel really upset and angry about what's happened. But I was saying it in that way. I wasn't thumping my fist on the table, I'm not shouting, but I was acknowledging and saying how I feel. And I think that helps. It helps me, and at least is respectful of the other person, to say how we are feeling, because actually you do get taken a little bit more seriously if you communicate with people in that kind of way. I didn't get my problem solved, but I felt a little bit better going out of the branch in Rosebank, because at least I was able to acknowledge and be polite and get polite and helpful responses from the other people. So as human beings, we're still okay. Makes sense? So yeah, you want to slap somebody, but not going to help. So, but acknowledging it and saying, look, sometimes I get so mad about these situations that I actually want to slap somebody. Nolene can be useful and helpful. But you're not going to actually do it. That's the most important thing. You're not actually going to do it. Yeah, so distinguish between how you actually feel and how you are going to communicate about it. Different things. Yeah. Questions? Feedback for me. It's good to see the messages in the chat that many of you are finding this very helpful. These
Mark,
are
sorry, from my side, I find it really difficult to keep my tone even. So
yeah.
I think what has helped me in all our mentoring sessions is just to remember how you talk, and then I just go, okay, I really need to talk like Mark does, and it helps.
Yeah, it takes years of practice sometimes. But I think the most important thing that we need to get out of these difficult conversations is an outcome that we can live with, or that is good for us as much as possible. And very often that is good or works for the other party as well. And aggressive behavior or submissive behavior is not the way to get to a good outcome. So this is so important. We negotiate with people. We have to negotiate with people almost every day about something. We want something from somebody else. And we would like to get as much of that as possible from the other person, or support them to give it to us, or whatever it happens to be. You know, sometimes you have to buy a house or a car, you have to negotiate with somebody. And you want to get to an outcome that is going to work for you. And also, as much as possible, is going to work for the other party as well. It's about getting to win-win outcomes very often. And yeah, so getting beyond the difference and finding where are the points of commonality and so on is an important part of that. We are negotiating every day. And yeah, doing it in a way that respects the humanity of the other person and puts the issue apart from the individual that you're talking to or with is a good way to do that. Because most of the things that we have to negotiate about, or most of the conflict that we have to resolve, is about something or something that's going on, or it could be some bad news, it could be the complaint or the feedback, but it's not the other person who is the problem, not the person we're talking to generally. And very often, if you have the conversation in a good way, you're communicating directly with people and inviting the feedback. Very often the feedback can be very helpful for us in terms of getting to a good resolution. There may be things that each of us also has to do to make it work. It's very seldom is it just a one-way street, that it's all the responsibility of the other person. Mark.
Yeah, Mark, I think we all would like to have conversations where we respect each other and have the positive outcome for both of us. But arguments sometimes are a fact of life, and they do occur.
Yes.
And it's a strange thing, well, for me particularly, or maybe not particularly, but some of my strongest relationships now have been born out of arguments with people.
Yeah.
Was aggressive.
Yeah.
I guess that's just like, I don't know, that's egos or posturing, or I don't know how you put it, but that's not the preferred course of action, if I can say that.
Yeah, look, people like to strike positions sometimes and to
Yeah.
be right.
Yeah.
And it's good to get to the point where where we as individuals can be intrigued about the need of other people to be right, and to find out more about why they think they are right about something. If we think we disagree with them, why does this other person feel so strongly about this? And why do they think they're right? And to explore that with them, rather than just saying why you think they're wrong, but to explore why they think they are right can be a very good way of being assertive with people.
Yeah.
As well, to acknowledge the fact they've got some strong opinions and to find out why they hold them. And that can often find or help you to understand people better and to find out what is very valuable about how they think and where you still might yourself disagree, but nonetheless have some shared perspectives on a problem somehow. So I think stepping away from needing to always be right and find out why the other person thinks they are right before you put your views onto the table can often be a good way forward. Doesn't mean you have to change your views, but you might end up understanding them better. And ultimately, you can get to the point where these relationships can become very strong and very good, even though you might still disagree about some things.
I think they call it agree to disagree sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you will agree to disagree, or you will agree on, for example, I have a lot of difficult conversations with people about crime in Johannesburg, and people get very upset and hot under the collar about it sometimes. And I take a slightly different perspective from many of them, but I understand where they're coming from. And I understand how they've got to the place where they are angry and upset. And I understand the issues. I just have a different conclusion about the issues from them. But we would share a lot in terms of how we diagnose the problem. So you build common ground where you can with people. Yeah. Guys, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. So I think we'll probably move towards wrapping up at around 2:30. if that's okay with people. But what would maybe be good would be to, as I sometimes do, if we go around the group and get some feedback or further thoughts from anybody, or final thoughts from you all before we wrap up the session, then that would be very helpful for me as well, in terms of feedback for me, and help us to embed some of the learning that we take out of this session. So I don't know if anyone would like to kick that off, but very good to get some final reflections from you. Anyone can start. Or the big learning that you want to take away. Mark, yeah.
I think, Mark, it's sometimes we get we get not railroaded, but we follow a railroad path, and that's our only path. And sometimes conversations like we're having with you now sort of says, well, it's not just the railroad. There's a wider perspective in life, and we need to be sometimes just reminded of those perspectives, just to sort of go back and think about things again, instead of just saying, well, this is the way I am. You don't have to be that way. You can do things in a different way.
Yeah.
So I think it's nice for you to have sort of discussed the different ways of doing something that sometimes we don't always take into consideration.
Thank you, because we can't always change who we are, or completely change how other people see us, but we can change our behaviors.
Yeah.
That's something we can certainly learn. Yeah. Wojciech, you're taking out how to deal with aggressive people. Yeah. I hope that's been useful for you.
As for me, yeah.
And you also say, Wojciech, very often we want to get aggressive as well without really intending to. Yeah. Think about the outcome that you want. That's, I would say, always useful and can keep you focused on good communication. Yeah. Carmel.
On my side, I thoroughly enjoyed the session. Definitely learned a lot of new things, and I will start practicing on how to be a more assertive speaker. And if you have any book recommendations for us on this topic, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, I'll have a look and see. I think a lot of these things we just learn, but I'll see if there's something written that I can find out about. Yeah. Yes, thank you, Carmel. That's useful. Sepiso, anything you take away?
On my side, what I've taken away, fundamentally, it's the fact that the way you talk, I mean, the tone of how you say things matters the most than whatever you say afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's a really good start. It's just to practice keeping your volume and tone as normal, even if you are having a harder conversation sometimes. Thank you. Mary Joy, what is your big takeaway?
My takeaway is that to stay calm, and just make it a conversation about the other person as well. Just to be involved and staying calm.
Yeah, staying calm is so valuable and is healthy as well for each of us to stay calm as we navigate difficult pathways sometimes through life. Yeah, thank you for that. Muketwa. Any takeaways? Eugene?
Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had to pick up a call while you're still asking me. Anyway, my take home for today's session is that, especially in leadership, there's no need for one to be, commanding. There's no need for a command and control leadership kind of thing. You need to, say things in a nice way. You don't have to push people around, if you have to fire someone, you need to say it in a positive way so that they also take a lesson home. They don't have to, feel sad about what's actually happening. They should take a lesson with whatever that is being portrayed to them, that, okay, you cannot have this job because you're underperforming. You cannot have this job because, your skills are not really effective here and there. So that's my lesson for today. Thank you.
Thank you. And the way you express it is lovely in terms of how you would talk about it. Thank you. Yeah. Pelontle, how are you? Any takeaways for today?
Hi, Mark. Hi, everyone.
I don't know if I
think-
pronounced your name correctly.
Can you please pronounce it again?
Pelontle.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I would also like to apologize for joining late, but from what I caught, I think what I would like to take away is how to deal with conversations with fellow colleagues and also how to initiate certain discussions with my line manager. So that's some of the advices that you shared are some of the things that I would like to practice at work because I am fairly new to the industry.
Yeah.
So yes.
Good. Well, I hope that goes well for you. Thank you for being part of this. Muketwa, are you with us still, or any big takeaways from your side?
Mark, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm in a bit of a noisy environment, but I hope I'm gonna be audible enough.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, yes, my takeaway for today is that I think a proper approach when it comes to communicating with you is very crucial, because the way in which you communicate with your fellow employees also does affect your professionalism at work. And or additionally, if you feel that you're still angry over something, I think it's best to first calm down before you can actually approach the person whom you think you want to confront or ask certain questions. Then when you feel that you're calm and you are able to communicate in a civilized manner, that's when you can actually go to the person and communicate with the person, so that you don't end up aggressively talking to the person or approaching to a person in a wrongful tone or a high tone. That's my takeaway for today.
Great, thank you. I was just thinking that some of the theory behind this, Carmel, you were asking about any reading, I think. In psychological terms, what we are talking about when we talk about assertive communication is adult to adult communication. We are communicating with our colleagues and with people around us as adults. I'm an adult and they are adults as well. Aggressive communication is, in psychological terms, what they call parent to child, where you are telling the other person, where the parent is telling the child. You're treating the other person as a child and you're trying to behave like their parent. And similarly, submissive communication is sometimes where you step into the child role of being told what to do or how things are by the parent. And those parent to child communications have their place sometimes in families, where sometimes you have to tell a young child not to put their fingers into the plug. And you tell them, and if necessary, you shout at them not to do it. But this kind of communication doesn't work in the workplace. In the workplace, we need adult to adult communication and to treat the other people as fundamentally as adults. And that's the psychological thinking behind these different forms of communicating with each other. As much as possible, we always need to keep 99% of our workplace communication as adult to adult level, even 100% maybe. Yeah. Thanks very much. Nolene, do you want to summarize on what has been your big takeaway from today?
I think I've already said, Mark, just from my side, as soon as I get aggro or my voice raises, I just think back to these sessions and I moderate it and I try and talk like you do.
I don't always get it perfect. I was struggling in the bank this morning. So to realize these are ongoing journeys for us all to behave in productive and useful ways. And if you
It
don't
is,
do it,
and
yeah.
sorry, it is, and I'm thrilled to say that it's going to be an ongoing journey for us going forward still. This will probably be our last session for this intake, so
Yes.
until June, but we will continue going forward in the next year. So that's very exciting for me, and I'm sure for our mentees that we currently have, as well as the new mentees coming in July.
Good. Thanks very much, Nolene. And I think the last thing I would say is that for all of you, if you don't do this for any other reason but for your own health and stress levels, that's a really good reason to use assertive communication, because you manage yourself better. Even if you can't always get other people to communicate with you in the way that you would like, do it for your own health and stress and well-being. That's a really good start.
And a very good point.
Yeah, okay, so thanks very much, everybody. Good luck. And yeah, good luck on your continuing professional journeys. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye. Thanks so much, Mark.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.